Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive into the world of electric vehicles?
Always ready.
We're taking a deep dive today into an insightful report called Innovations in Electric Vehicles. It's by Jörg-Owe, and we'll try to unpack all the really interesting stuff about where EVs have been, where they are now, and maybe even where they're going.
Schneepat really does a great job of, pulling back the curtain on the history of EVs. Most people don't realize how far back they go.
Right. It's amazing to think. Like back in the 1800s, Schneepat talks about EVs sharing the road with horses and carriages. It's mind-blowing. So what made them so popular back then?
Well, compared to the loud, smelly gas guzzlers of the time, they were pretty appealing. Quieter and definitely cleaner. And Schneepat even mentions that they were popular with women drivers because they were so much easier to start. No crank needed.
Huh. But we know they eventually faded away. So what happened? What changed?
Yeah. Well, their range was a big limitation. Batteries back then weren't what they are today. And as gasoline cars became more common, well, the infrastructure just kind of took over. Gas stations everywhere, but nowhere to charge your electric car.
Makes sense. It's like the classic chicken and egg problem.
Yeah.
But then, as Schneepat points out, we see this EV renaissance in the late 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it seems to be driven by, battery technology.
Oh, absolutely. Especially, lithium-ion batteries. They were a total game changer.
Right. But Schneepat digs deeper. And he connects this resurgence to something else as well, this growing concern for the environment, and stricter regulations pushing for cleaner transportation.
Yeah, it's like all these factors kind of came together at the right time.
So speaking of innovation, Schneepat goes beyond just the batteries themselves, right? He talks about things like software-defined vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Our cars are practically turning into giant smartphones on wheels.
It's amazing, isn't it? Schneepat talks about over-the-air updates. Imagine, your car getting better over time, just like your phone does with new features and improvements. And then there's V2X connectivity.
V2X.
Yeah, vehicle to everything. Cars talking to each other, talking to the infrastructure. It could revolutionize safety and efficiency. Think about it. Your car could warn you about an accident up ahead before you even see it. Or it could automatically adjust your speed to optimize traffic flow.
It's like our cars are becoming part of this interconnected, intelligent network. It's fascinating. And speaking of intelligence, Schneepat delves into AI. And it's not just about self-driving cars, right?
Right. Schneepat explains how AI is being used to, optimize battery management, predict maintenance needs, and even extend battery lifespan.
Now, that's something I think a lot of people are worried about with EVs, right? The battery life?
Sure, it's a valid concern. But with AI analyzing your driving patterns and making adjustments, on the fly, well, imagine how much more efficient and longer-lasting batteries could become.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to EVs charging. Schneepat paints this picture of a rapidly expanding charging infrastructure. It seems like fast chargers are popping up everywhere, making those long road trips less daunting. What do you think?
Yeah. And Schneepat gives a lot of credit to, governments and companies like Electrify America who are investing heavily in this. They're really trying to make charging an EV as easy as, filling up your gas tank is today.
But with all this talk about charging infrastructure and battery production, are we overlooking the environmental impact of making those batteries in the first place? Schneepat does bring up the challenges of raw material extraction and all that.
Schneepat doesn't shy away from that. He's very clear about the need for sustainable sourcing and recycling. He talks about this idea of a circular economy where battery materials are constantly being reused and recycled to minimize environmental impact.
So it's about finding that balance, right? Promoting EVs, but doing it in a way that's truly sustainable for the planet.
Exactly. And that's something we have to keep in mind as we move forward.
Now let's talk about the EV market itself. Schneepat describes it as booming. It seems like every car company out there is trying to get a piece of the electric pie. And he specifically highlights these incredible sales figures and projections for continued growth, especially in places like China and Europe. What's driving that?
Well, China, for one, has really embraced EVs. They've got government incentives, ambitious targets, and in Europe, you've got this combination of environmental awareness and policies pushing for cleaner transportation.
It's interesting to see how different regions are approaching this, kind of at their own pace and with their own priorities. But Schneepat also brings up a very important point. He talks about securing the supply chains for those essential battery materials, things like lithium and cobalt, as this huge hurdle that we need to overcome.
Right. And it's not just about securing enough materials, it's also about doing it ethically. Because Schneppet points out that a lot of these materials are mined in regions with, questionable labor practices, and we have to make sure that the push for cleaner transportation doesn't come at the expense of human rights and environmental justice.
It's like this push for a greener future might inadvertently create new problems if we're not careful. So, are we ready to face these challenges head on and actually make the changes needed to create a truly sustainable and ethical EV future?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into Schneppat's essay.
It seems like this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to uncover. So we've talked about the challenges of getting those essential battery materials, but does Schneppat offer any solutions to this?
Oh, yeah, he dives right into that. One of the things he talks about are alternative battery technologies, moving beyond lithium ion.
Like what? What's out there?
Well, one that's generating a lot of buzz is solid-state batteries. Schneppat seems pretty excited about these.
Solid state. I think I've heard of that, but I don't really know much about them. What's so special about them?
Well, for one thing, they could offer much higher energy density, so that means, longer range for EVs, and potentially much faster charging times as well. Plus, they're considered safer because they don't have those flammable liquid electrolytes that you find in the lithium-ion batteries.
So it's like hitting multiple birds with one stone, kind of solving a few problems at once. But are these solid-state batteries, like, ready to go? Are they something we'll see in cars soon?
That's the big question. Schneppat acknowledges that, the technology is still in those early stages of development. Mass production is a hurdle, and obviously cost is a big factor too.
Right, but it sounds promising, at least. Now, Schneppat also talks about needing more than just the traditional car companies involved in this EV revolution. He talks about collaborating with tech companies, and I'm curious, what role does he see them playing?
Well, Schneppat argues that tech companies bring a lot of expertise to the table. They've got a deep understanding of software, data analytics, even materials science. And those skills can be really valuable when it comes to things like, developing better batteries, creating smarter charging infrastructure, and even just making the whole EV experience, more user-friendly for drivers.
So it's like combining the best of both worlds, right?
Yeah.
The car companies know how to build cars, and the tech companies know how to innovate and make things, smarter.
Exactly. And Schneppat seems to believe that kind of collaboration is crucial for success. But it's not just about the companies, right? He also dives into the role of government policies.
Yeah, governments can really make a difference, right? They can offer incentives like tax breaks and subsidies to make EVs more affordable for people. And they can implement stricter emissions regulations to push the market towards cleaner cars. And of course, they play a big role in building that charging infrastructure we talked about.
Right, all of that. Schneppat highlights how important that policy support is to create a really favorable environment for EVs to, flourish. He even argues that a unified approach, with governments working together globally, is what's needed to establish standards and really address those supply chain challenges.
And speaking of global, Schneppat talks about how the EV revolution is playing out differently in different parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
He points to China being this dominant force in the market and Europe making rapid progress and the United States sort of, still emerging in its role.
It's like we're all on this path towards electric mobility, but everyone's starting from a different place. Different priorities, different challenges, different approaches.
It's fascinating to see how those differences play out. But, one thing that really stood out to me in Schneppat's essay is how he brings it back to the human element, the societal impact of all this. It's not just about the technology, it's about the people.
Absolutely. Schneppat challenges us to think beyond the shiny new EVs, and the convenience of electric driving. He asks us to consider, what does a truly equitable and sustainable EV future look like?
What kind of questions does he raise?
Well, for one thing, he's concerned about accessibility. Will EVs just be, luxury items for the wealthy? Or can we make them affordable for everyone? And he ties that into the ethical sourcing of materials, making sure that the push for EVs doesn't create new problems like exploitation and environmental damage.
It's like Schneppat's calling for a more holistic view,
Yeah.
right? Looking at the entire EV ecosystem, from the mines to the factories, the roads, and eventually, to the recycling centers.
He wants us to make sure this transition benefits everyone, not just a select few.
It's a really powerful message, I think. And it makes me wonder if we're really prepared to have those tough conversations and make the changes that are needed to create a truly sustainable and ethical EV future.
And those conversations need to start now. Schneppat's essay is a great starting point for us to think critically about this revolution and make sure that we're heading in the right direction.
It feels like we've only scratched the surface here. There's so much more to explore. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into electric vehicles with Jörg-Owe Schneppat. We've looked back at their history, explored those amazing innovations that are like fueling their comeback, and even wrestled with the challenges of building a truly sustainable EV future. But as we wrap up our exploration of Schneppat's innovations in electric vehicles, I think it's time to zoom out and consider the bigger picture.
And, Schneppat doesn't just leave us marveling at the tech. He pushes us to think about, the deeper implications of this EV revolution. It's not just about swapping out gas guzzlers for electric cars. It's a much bigger shift.
He really drives home that point about a paradigm shift, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're rethinking our whole relationship with transportation, our cities, even our energy systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Schneppat talks about rethinking our infrastructure and how charging stations, those are just one piece of the puzzle. We've got to figure out how our electric grid is going to handle this huge increase in demand and how cities are going to adapt, to make room for all the charging that needs to happen. And then there's the whole question of, what do we do with all those EV batteries when they reach the end of their life? We've got to figure out the recycling and disposal.
It's like building this whole new ecosystem, for energy and transportation and even urban planning. The scope of this is incredible.
And Schneppat makes it clear that this isn't going to happen overnight. I mean, it's a long-term vision. It's going to require, collaboration across all kinds of industries, and this willingness to be flexible, to adapt to new challenges and opportunities as they come up.
He definitely acknowledges the hurdles, but he doesn't just dwell on the negative, right? Schneppat seems, cautiously optimistic. He sees the potential for EVs to create a cleaner, more efficient, and ultimately more sustainable world.
One thing that really resonated with me in Schneppat's essay is how much he emphasizes the human element of this whole thing. I mean, he's not just focused on the nuts and bolts of the technology. He's thinking about the people who are going to be driving these vehicles, living in these cities, and working in these industries that are all being reshaped by this EV revolution.
He's asking us to really grapple with some tough questions, isn't he? Like, how will EVs affect jobs in the car industry? How can we make sure that everyone benefits from this transition, not just those who can afford the latest Tesla? And how do we create a future where transportation is not just cleaner, but fairer, more equitable and accessible for everyone?
Yeah, Schneppat doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but he wants us to engage in these conversations, to be active participants in shaping this electric future.
So as we come to the end of this deep dive, I'm feeling a mix of excitement and honestly a little bit of responsibility. EVs are here, they're changing the world, but it's really up to us to steer that change in the right direction.
We've taken a journey with Jörg-Owe Schneppat, looking back at the history, exploring the innovations that are driving the EV revolution right now and peering into that potential future.
It's been an amazing journey, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to keep exploring this topic and, be part of the conversation. What do you think about this electric future? What excites you? What worries you? And, what role do you see yourself playing in all this? Thanks for joining us on this electrifying deep dive into the world of EVs. We hope you found it insightful. And until next time, keep those minds curious.